the Lydalactylus williamsi, the electric blue gecko, we knew that they were critically endangered. All of the scientific research said that they were critically endangered. And, you know, I saw a list come in from Germany just before they were put on CITES, where the chap was offering them in thousands, lots of 1,000.
Wow.
But there was reportedly only 1,500 in the wild. So population numbers were wrong somewhere.
Yes, yeah.
But as a trade, we knew that they were critically endangered, and they were critically endangered because of habitat destruction, not because of collection by the pet trade. But CITES had never considered the species. There was no quota because they didn't agree that it was endangered until the trade came forward and said, you know what, this animal needs some help. And it immediately got Appendix 1 listing. I think we just need a watchful eye. Are there species that we know that there's a problem in the wild, whether it's through collection for the pet trade or habitat destruction, climate change? If there's an official conservation project, let's support that. If there's an invisible arc, let's support that. If it's just a species that's been missed off of CITES, let's tell them.
Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. It is somehow that time of year again to have John Courteney-Smith, who is the head of science and innovation of Arcadia Reptile, back on the podcast. For those of you who are longtime listeners, we know we've had John on for the past 4 summers, although this is going to be technically fall by the time it comes out, but we've had John on for 4 summers consecutively, and I don't know why we would stop next summer. I'm sure we already have planned another episode, so we will continue to do this, and it's always one of everybody's favorite conversations because John is so passionate and interesting to listen to. And in this episode, we discuss herpetoculture just in general. What are some things that John sees that he's likes, and the directions we're headed, and some things that we can maybe do better. And then we really delve into the research and development behind products. You know, a lot of us will go to the reptile store, we'll buy a bulb, or you'll order a bulb online, and that's sort of the extent of our understanding of how those projects get developed or products get developed. So in this conversation, John walks us through a new mercury-vapor bulb that they produced for the North American market. And he talks about how much work, time, and money goes into making sure those products work and function properly. And it's a very interesting episode. And then we also discuss their new tortoise food that they all are producing as well. And John goes into incredible detail about how this food is developed and how it's made and how beneficial it is, and also some of the kind of concerning things about the tortoise food that's currently on the market that are commonly used, and some of the issues with those, and how the Arcadia product that will also be released this fall is going to sort of mend some of those issues. It made me want to buy a tortoise at the end because the food that he's developed sounds so good. So you will enjoy this podcast. Of course, any podcast with John is always fascinating, so enjoy the episode. Before we jump in, make sure you head to animalsathome.network.com if you're looking for more information on this episode or any other podcast on the network. If you'd like to join us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. Thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Again, like I said last episode, there are some enclosures behind me that we have set up. I cannot wait to actually show you guys what we're doing in this room and kind of creating this set, decking it out completely with Custom Reptile Habitats enclosures, and it's going to look awesome, and that will be my fall project. And that leads me into the last announcement, which is I'm going to take a small break from podcasting through the month of September. This will be the final episode until later, either late September or early October. So there might be a 3 or 4 week gap until the next episode. And I know that probably hurts, but between the other podcasts on the network, you will constantly have new podcasts to listen to, so you just will have a little break from the Animals at Home podcast. But during that time, I'm going to be setting up these enclosures, and I'm also going to be hopefully putting out videos about these enclosures. So you won't be absent of content from me, but you will have a little bit of absent from content from the podcast. And I've already recorded episodes into October, which are amazing as well, so you will want to make sure you are still tuned in and subscribed so you don't miss those. But having said all that, let's jump into the annual episode with John Courteney-Smith. Enjoy. All right. Well, John, welcome back to the podcast number 4. Somehow it's been 4 years in a row we've done this. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's great to be here again. I really look forward to our summer meeting.
Me too.
The whole year's gone past and everything's changed, new things, old things. It's great, isn't it?
Yeah, there's always, it's amazing how much changes within our hobby on a year-to-year basis, and there's always so much to talk about, and you're always a fascinating person to listen to. So you're clearly one of the most highly requested people, and I know people are actually starting to recognize that we do one every summer, because I've had a few messages, when's John coming on for the summer? So people will be happy to hear this. Before we get into anything super complex, I wanted to start with the conversation that we actually ended on privately at the last episode, and that was the blue tree monitor that came into your collection within the last year. I think it was maybe right after our last episode, and you've been working with that animal for maybe a year or so. So can you tell us a little bit about that? I know it came in rough shape. Maybe you could start with kind of how it came and the rehab.
It arrived through the RSPCA in the UK. It was a seized animal in real horrendous condition. It had been kept and treated by vets before we had it, but it had incredible scarring across the body. I can't work out whether it had been kept too wet and allowed to fester, whether it had received burns, or whether someone had tried to save a few quid, got confused and put a UVC lamp over it, which we have seen before. But the scarring had pretty much removed all of the blue on the body. Very deep scarring. It was in a pretty bad shape. It took us a while to get it feeding consistently, and then it stopped feeding, and which was a bit of a concern at the time. But actually, we had full vet records from the animal, radiograms and blood testing that we could compare year on year, and we took the animal back to a local specialist exotics vet, and we had another set of x-rays done and blood testing done, and actually its calcium serum levels had shot up, and we had been, obviously while it was feeding, we'd been treating it or supplementing it with revitalized, our mineral and vitamin powder and magnesium, and the bone density had increased massively. There was, if you compare the two x-rays, it was massive differences. Blood serum levels were really very high. Then the animal started to lay eggs.
Wow. So
that confirmed that it was a female. And the eggs were in pretty bad shape, to be honest. And after we got over that blip, she started feeding consistently large amounts. And so we've basically been treating the animal alongside vet guidance where needed. We've been exposing it to heat from a coupling of 75-watt flood halogen and a 50-watt heat projector. We're providing a UV index of about 4 at the basking, at the top perch, at the basking area, and very powerful setup of LED to brighten it up and live plant the thing. Lots of enrichment, change the diet around, and she has really filled out this season. I have no worries about it at all. In actual fact, the skin, the outer layers of skin, are repairing rapidly now, and there's really good blue coloration coming back. Massive visible differences, and we've obviously photographed and filmed the animal and shared some of those photographs and films along the way. And she's coming up for that. If she does it the same as last year, she's coming up soon for that season where she may lay again. And of course, that will be the real proof. So she's going to be back off to the vet. We're going to have another set of x-rays and blood testing done just to see where she is compared to last year. And we're pretty confident we'll see higher concentrations again. And then look at the quality of the eggs this year. If the calcification of the eggs is better than last year and the skin's starting to heal, we know that we've really turned a corner with that animal, and we could contemplate, maybe, depending on the vet analysis, maybe we will pair it.
Yeah, it's
an incredible animal, incredibly intelligent, really needs a lot of enrichment, climbing.
Yeah, what has it been like working? Because you work with birds as well. Is there a lot of similarities?
Yeah, very much. It's like having a parrot. Yeah, I mean, they really are very similar. They think you can play games, scent trailing, have it climbing, have it out. We actually did a fair bit of work with some of with Omnigold and Insectigold, the prepared foods that we make, using it for scent trailing around the Viv, particularly the insect-based one, and then watching the animal follow scent trails through the enclosure until it would find a food parcel. And that was quite illuminating for me. I thought that was really very, it was good for the animal, and it was good for me to see that it was actually picking up on scents and following it in a line as we'd drawn it around the enclosure. So really happy to have the animal, really privileged to have the animal. And it's been quite an experience seeing something that looks so ragged, that had so much. I just can't comprehend the life that it must have had before it came here. It really was just scar tissue and blister.
Yeah, well, I remember this time last year you were really worried about her whether or not, like, thinking that she might not survive. And so when you brought her into the collection, did you do a pretty heavy quarantine setup? Because obviously you have a very sick animal and you have other animals that are in the same area. What did you guys do to
It was the only animal in the room at that time.
Okay.
So luckily we were rebuilt, and we have rebuilt our whole collection, root and branch, everything brand new. So that meant the animals that I already had were in a different building, and the animal room now just had empty enclosures, and this one set up for that animal. And so, yes, it had the place to its own for a good month or so. And we just checked it, observed it, sought the vet's advice, and it actually had a clean bill of health from a vet before it arrived here. We knew that it wasn't carrying anything contagious, but it was burnt and calcium deficient seriously. So yes, it had a quarantine, but I wasn't necessarily worried about any pathogens that could pass on. I felt quite early on that it was physical damage rather than caused by a third party.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it just goes to show how resilient these animals are. And when you do put them in a setup that gives them the proper energy and nutrition, how quickly they can actually rebound from basically death. Yeah,
you're quite right. And so we'll continue to study it. All I can say is I just feel so privileged to be able to work with it and try and give it a decent home.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're doing an amazing job, so we'll continue. If anyone's looking for updates with that, you guys do post on the Arcadia Instagram page once in a while. So why don't we jump into just looking at the hobby as a whole over the last year or so, and what are some things that jump out to you of some positive changes that you've noticed over the past 12, 18 months?
Obviously, I suffer with being very hyper-focused. I'm very blinkered, and that's just a quirk of my brain. But I've noticed that the thing that's made me most happy is this, what appears to me to be a wholesale move towards naturalism in keeping. I feel so passionate about replication of wild habitats. Our whole animal room out here, we've tried to take to an extreme. Every cage is decorated from a reference photograph and then planted with species of plant that are either originate from that area or that continent. So we try and keep it as naturalistic as possible, and seeing how animals respond to native planting and decorative style, and seeing that really roll out into the hobby. The serious numbers of ball python keepers now keeping in very large enclosures with climbing animals and hides and live plants, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of our hobby. This point that there must have been in the last year or so, where as a collective group of keepers, a significant number of people said, "That's it, no more. We're going to do this properly or not at all." So I think okay, product comes, product goes, tech changes, but I'm always more interested in theology, the ethics of the brand, what people think and how they act on that. Mm-hmm. And so that's the thing that's really impressed me, just to see numbers of people speaking out and saying, do you know what? I've put my leopard gecko in a 4x3x2 and it uses every inch of the space, and it comes out and it sits under the heat lamp and under the UV lamp, and the flipping thing started biting me. Well, they will. They've got the energy to do so now.
Yeah.
And I just love that. I think that's reptile keeping as it should be.
And I'm seeing a lot of sort of what you're saying, pride in people keeping in a more naturalistic way, providing more space, adding more enrichment. Especially on Instagram, you see a lot of keepers who are relatively new and inexperienced and novice keepers setting up with a great setup and then just being proud of what they've created. And I think that's what we want people to be focusing on, is how exciting it can be to create something natural and to give the animal opportunities, and then you get to watch the animal, and it's this positive feedback loop that we talk about on the channel all the time, and it seems to be really catching a lot of momentum right now.
Yeah, and isn't it great? Mm. Isn't it great? Because once we move, as we move into this sort of new era of naturalistic keeping, we will start to develop even more pride and more skills and more ability, and product will change so that it provides for animals in these type of enclosures. And to me, that's just really exciting. Mm-hmm. Really exciting. Last time we spoke about the difference between bioactive and naturalism, and how, I said how naturalism trumps, or good naturalism trumps bad bio every time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the sea change that we're seeing. We're seeing people starting to realise that, poor decoration with a few springtails in the bottom of a natural substrate doesn't actually provide better care. What provides better care is decoration and an orientation and a style that an animal's evolved to utilise. And when you start seeing weight of numbers of people doing that and sharing their experience, that's when you get a snowball effect. More and more people start to realise it, so more and more people become vocal, and see really, really good enclosures.
I have a question about this. Might take us on a short tangent, but I think I had sent you a message on Facebook maybe a few months ago because somebody had asked me this, and they said that when you create the drainage layer, you're not using a divider or a screen to separate the drainage layer from the substrate. I think that was the question. And you said you don't use a screen, right, to allow the roots to get in to the drainage layer, or are you not using a drainage layer at all?
You must use a drainage layer.
Right, okay.
I don't care what substrate you have, who made it, what it's for. A drainage layer works in multiple ways, and it's really important. Firstly, it will help increase oxygen and gaseous exchange around the bottom and into the soil. When you're looking at the makeup of soil, it's mostly weathered rock, so mineral, then it's gases and liquids, then it's organic matter. Okay, that's what soil's made up with. And one of the restrictive parts of plant growth is that when you put plants in soil, if the soil's too compacted, there's a lack of gaseous exchange. There's a lack of oxygen in the soil. So having an empty reservoir at the bottom will simply help aerate the soil. It's also a fantastic insurance policy from overwatering, right, and soil saturation and stagnation. It's really very easy to overwater your vivarium, and if you do and leave it, it will stagnate and your cultures will die off. You'll get a horrible smell, the plants start to drown. So a drainage layer is really very important. In terms of using a divider between the two layers, I choose not to. Now, there's no right or wrong answer, okay? If you place your substrate directly on top of your drainage layer, eventually your substrate will start to fall into the drainage layer. Now, for me, what I try and do is keep a mist, almost, a condensation within the drainage layer. And this means that the roots of the plant can come down into the drainage layer, and they will be able to pick up moisture and all the minerals that are washed through. Because every time you water your soil, particulates are going to go downwards and end up in the drainage layer, and you end up with it's hydroponics basically. It's a nutrient-rich soup. And for me, I didn't want plant roots inhibited being able to get into the drainage layer, where I wanted them to be able to pick up food very easily. I don't have a problem with people using a separating layer, but I really am not keen on things like fleece, fly mesh, anything where the weave is too fine. Then, roots have got to push through those to get downwards. So a wide weave mesh between the drainage and the soil, that's absolutely fine. I choose not to, but half of the reason I do that is that we keep animals in a certain way for a set period of time, and then we break it all down and start again anyway. Nothing's massively long term. Right.
So you're less worried about the layer getting compacted with the soil from on top, basically.
I'd rather just have the plants have free access.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Personally.
And even if you do use a screen, it's amazing how those little hair roots get through the screen. As long as it's a decently wide cube, like hole through the screens, the plants will find a way down there. But I see what you're saying about completely blocking it off. That almost defeats the purpose of having it.
Yeah, in my mind it does. And, eventually, even through a fleece, roots will bury through eventually, but they're going to be impeded in the process, and you might only still get those very fine whispery hair roots rather than a big tap root that we really want. So I choose not to. If you choose to, that's fine, but my counsel would be use a wide mesh.
Okay, that's a great tip. So we were talking about some of the positive changes. Are there some negative changes that you've seen happen in the past year or so that the ship is steering in the wrong direction in some areas, or is everything good?
Everything's not perfect. We're still seeing issues with some forms of lighting appearing on the market as an unregulated industry. I'm starting to find more and more problems with some historic products, where when you take it back to bare roots, you think, goodness, this just can't work. Why hasn't anybody realised this before? I think the hobby's going in the right direction. If we can really keep battering the door of naturalistic keeping and hopefully finally see an end of rat keeping, I think we're going in the right direction. There's been a few howlers of products released, but honestly, I don't believe they will last long enough to make any real negative impact on the hobby. For the first time, I think I actually feel quite relaxed about how the hobby's doing. We can always do better. One of the biggest risks of the hobby that I see is sadly still this prevalence of grey area imports.
Right.
Species that we know are either endangered but not on CITES, but we still continue to utilise them, or unscrupulous traders find workarounds on CITES to get them in. And I really worry that the desire for keepers to work with historic species that haven't been available for a while, or new species that nobody knows anything about, will actually cause detriment to our hobby long term. I think, if we're heading in the right direction in terms of naturalism, we need to polish our armour and show that we're quite an ethical business,
Yeah.
There are a couple of species that really worry me, and I think if that's exposed, that there is now trade in them again where there shouldn't be, it's going to leave the whole hobby open to accusations, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, ethical keeping goes beyond just what you do in your viv. It goes to the acquisition of these animals as well, and how they're bred and how we're getting them from the wild. And it's the easiest thing for an animal rights group to poke at. And there's no defense on our part, really. If we're smuggling things in and taking things out of the wild, poaching things out of the wild, there's almost no moral ground to stand on to say, no, we can do this. There are ethical ways to do that are proper, and then we could stand on some moral ground. But just to rip it out of the rainforest and ship it in a box and have someone's pet, we can't argue that.
No, I'm not. I've been very vocal. I'm not anti-wild caught for species where there is legal trade, and they could be used to make new banks, the invisible arc. I'm a real supporter of conservation that way. I mean, we wouldn't have any crested geckos if it didn't work. There's lots of species that have been really helped by ex situ conservation. What I'm really bothered about is species that have either zero quota and are being relisted in a different way so that CITES doesn't pick it up and shipments get in, or species that CITES don't know anything about, but we know there's. I'll give you a quick history. The Lydactylus williamsi, the electric blue gecko, we knew that they were critically endangered. All of the scientific research said that they were critically endangered. And, I saw a list come in from Germany just before they were put on CITES, where the chap was offering them in thousands, lots of 1,000.
Wow.
But there was reportedly only 1,500 in the wild. So population numbers were wrong somewhere.
Yes, yeah.
But as a trade, we knew that they were critically endangered, and they were critically endangered because of habitat destruction, not because of collection by the pet trade. Predominantly, it was habitat destruction and planting of palm oil and things like this. But CITES had never considered the species. There was no quota because they didn't agree that it was endangered until the trade came forward and said, you know what, this animal needs some help. And it immediately got Appendix 1 listing and zero quota, of course. So I think we just need a watchful eye. Are there species that we know that there's a problem in the wild, whether it's through collection for the pet trade or habitat destruction, climate change? If there's an official conservation project, let's support that. If there's an invisible arc, let's support that. If it's just a species that's been missed off of CITES, let's tell them.
Yes. Yeah, we don't want to take advantage of the loopholes.
Yeah.
Yeah, taking advantage of the loopholes doesn't make us look good. It just makes us look like we're being sneaky, and it's better to just put that out in the open, because we should actually care about what's happening in the wild, and we do want to protect the animals. I mean, that's what we all say, so we should actually act that out as well. And so are there areas in the hobby right now that you see that you want to have more development in? Like, obviously we talk about lighting all the time. Lighting, I think, is going to continue to grow. Are there other areas that you think, okay, there's some room for improvement here, or that you're excited about the development in the future? Definitely caging. I think,
there's some pretty good caging at the moment, but I think it needs some more thought.
Yeah.
Unless you're able and willing to build things at home, you're limited to what you can buy in shops and online. I really like Dale Tamura's outlook on cage building, where he'll build anything for anybody at any size or orientation. I'm still not convinced that doing it in plastic's the right thing to do, but I wait to be disproven on that. But that's a bit of an ick for me. But I think a lot more work needs to be done in cage availability.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing about having this sort of movement of more people keeping in this larger, more naturalistic way. We become a market for those products, because without the market, then these products just don't develop. So that's the other reason that it's exciting to have all these people realizing that we want to keep in better conditions, keep in better, larger enclosures, is suddenly the companies, and obviously you work for a reptile brand, so you're well aware of this, it's easier to sell to people when they actually want the items. If they still want to keep in a little Tupperware thing, good luck selling an $800 enclosure.
Yeah, exactly. I think the trick is getting that sort of magic point on the bridge of life where you stop having to persuade somebody that they need something, but they realise that actually my animal and my keeping experience will be better if we did it this way.
Yeah.
I'm quite interested, as at the point that we're recording this video, I'm quite interested to see where Bill Strand's Chameleon Academy series on caging goes, because I know he's, in the next few weeks, he's going to be covering different cage types and sizing and everything for chameleons. So I'm quite interested to see what conclusions Bill comes up with.
Yeah, Bill has some, I won't say too much, but I know that he has got some really interesting things planned. So he's developing some interesting things. So I'm very excited. I haven't seen anything yet, but I know he's building some stuff, or in his head he's got some cool ideas. So I'll be very excited to see that too. And as far as we're talking about new developments, is there some new tech advancements within the last year or so that you've seen that have been pretty impressive? I know you guys did release the Thermal Zoo Pro at some point I think that was within the last year. I don't think that was out, or no, was it out last time we talked?
It arrived just before Christmas 2021.
Okay, so it wasn't out yet. That's right.
Yeah, so kind of in the financial year period. Yeah, so we put a heck of a lot of work into that. I'd had a chance meeting with Frances Baines, where she showed me a prototype that some industrious zookeepers had been retrofitting commercial hydroponics units so that they had heat lamps in them. When I saw the unit, when you get that shock, oh my goodness, you could never sell this. It would never pass any certification. Please don't advise anybody. There's a real electrocution here. But the idea was very good. So we took that idea back and started to draw, and it took well over 2 years to draw up a fitting that incorporated lighting, T5 lighting, LED lighting, and 2 heat sources, all within a compact, aesthetically pleasing fitting that could be used in zoological enclosures or big at-home enclosures. And actually, it's always the smallest things that are hardest to fix when you get into these projects. So you look at really nice aesthetic curves and all these different parts in R&D. And actually, what I found very quickly was that I wanted all the light to merge in a centric space below the unit. And to do that, we had to bring angles in. So you'll notice the top of the unit comes down like this, and with the lighting on the sides. And that was very specific. We wanted to use lighting that was future-proof, where you wouldn't have to throw away the whole fitting if something went wrong. You can very easily swap out. If you buy one that's got 2 T5s in it, you can very easily unclick one T5 and click an LED in it, or vice versa, and for anything that we do in the future, it will be future-proof. But I really wanted the light to have a solid projection value below the unit, which is what we managed to do after a lot of jiggery pokery. Every unit's handmade; they can't be machine made. It's quite a complex thing for something that's so simple. Mm-hmm. So I'm really proud of that, and it's been very well accepted.
Well, it's kind of a nice, just all-in-one system, right? If someone's like, I just don't feel like learning about how all this lighting aspects works, you just have this box that does it all for you. Yeah,
and it comes with the lamps and everything. We put the lamps in for free. I don't know what the Canadian price is, but they start full retail price before any discounts. I wanted to make it available for everybody, as many people as possible. And, UK retail price start at £189, mm-hmm. including all the glassware. So we really tried to make something that was a bit different, that was future-proof, that had good recyclable values to it, that was aesthetically pleasing, that you could tinker with yourself in terms of lamp selection, but was quite affordable.
And so I guess for anybody that's listening, and maybe I should have started with this, that isn't aware of the product, maybe you could just quickly run through exactly what it is. It's a box that obviously has the different types of lighting in it, but maybe you could just give us a quick, 10-second overview.
So there's a painted black aluminium housing, which holds, you can choose. It's either pre-fitted with either 2 Pro T5 high output T5 light bars, or 1 Pro T5 and 1 Jungle Dawn LED bar on the outer side of the luminaire, and then there's 2 deep dome clamp lamps fitted in the center. So you've got 2 independently controlled heat sources, and a hanging kit, so you can hang the product over or inside of an enclosure. Switches on all the cables, and there's a link hole as well, so you can remove a little rubber bung, and you can link up to 3 units or you can link the lighting for up to 3 units together from one power source. So, if you've got Crocs or something, you can make a nice big luminaire. The heat lamps are individually switched and individually plugged, so thermostat use, no problem at all. And it's black, it looks smart.
Yeah, it is a really nice looking unit. And I have a question about the deep heat projectors, because I know that there's some people in the advancing lighting community that push back on these, and so I wanted to know what your thoughts on this. I know that the criticism of them is that they are a carbon filament, so they produce mainly infrared B, and I think that the moral of the story is the sun doesn't produce as much infrared B, and really IRA or infrared A is the most important. Is your opinion just we don't know, so we should be providing as much of both as possible, or where do you sit on that?
When the heat projector, when I started, the R&D project was 7 years on the heat projector.
Wow.
Trying to fit existing tech that failed constantly, until we got to the design that we made. And I learned a lot about infrared, and I learned a lot about bioavailability and this, that, and the other. Very clearly, when we released the product, and it was only available in 50 watts at the time, when we released the product, it had 2 very defined uses. And I think those defined uses got a little confused over time in the keeper sphere. The first use was I wanted the product to increase welfare. Now, at the time, bearing in mind this is 5 years ago, nearly, since we released it, and I'd been working on it for 7 years before that, of course, there was still a massive amount of people. Most people keeping leopard geckos, crested geckos, were using heat mats or ceramic heaters, which are just infrared C. And as we know, they just warm air. And they're the heat mats, cables, radiant heat panels, ceramic heaters are the worst choice in terms of being bioavailable. And what I wanted was a product for people that chose to use a lightless source, whether they had light sensitive animals or they preferred to use a lightless source. They could move to a heat projector, and it would increase welfare because infrared B is more bioavailable. It pushes into the body further than infrared C. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first prime use. I then started in the R&D section of that history, which you can actually see is in book 4 in Fire. Mm-hmm. I give the whole history of the heat projector. I started using it as a prime basking lamp, but alongside multiple T5s and LED bars. And what I saw on species that, when we included the heat projector, was that on every single species we tried it over a number of years, we saw an improvement in coloration, a improvement in body score, increase in aggression and feeding aggression and reproduction. So for sure, that energy was impacting those animals to a level that I hadn't seen before. It worked. But we do know that the sun provides more UV, infrared A, and that pushes into the dermis even further. But the second primary use when we released it, one was for people that chose to use lightless sources to increase bioavailability and to save them some money on running costs, because a 50-watt heat projector will do a better job than a 100-watt ceramic.
Right.
So it lowered their running costs. The secondary job was to use it in a pairing, like I mentioned just earlier with the tree monitor, where you'd use, I'm really a fan of halogen flood lamps. And so I will use a halogen flood lamp. They're very bright, they've got a high color rendition, they're very quickly warming, and they're infrared A rich. There's a lot of infrared A in there. but hardly any infrared B. So what I then do is I buddy up the two lamps side by side. So I've got a central basking area, and I've got the halogen providing lots of visible light. It's quickly warming, attractive to basking, loads of infrared A, and I use the heat projector to make up for the infrared B. And that's where we see the biggest positive change in animals. In actual fact, with veterinary treatment cases here and with specialist vets, we have something known as heat projector therapy, where if you've got a very, very sick animal where it just needs some seclusion, you can use a heat projector on that animal, and they do seem to recover much faster than any other type of lighting. So yeah, I'm happy for people to use the lamp in whatever way they see fit. For me, the best use possible is to use it alongside another heat lamp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That way you're getting that coupled effect. And then, like you said, the halogen or tungsten filaments aren't providing as much infrared B. And it's, the lighting and the energy that we get from the sun is just so mysterious. I think the only thing we can do is try to replicate it as best as possible, and then just assume that will be beneficial. The body will be absorbing these energies. We don't know exactly what it's doing a lot of the time, but if you're seeing actual tangible improvements, then there must be some benefit, provided that you're providing shade. That's always the criticism. Oh, you have all this lighting, but where's the animal going to get away from the lighting? Well, yes, shade. We don't have lights all over the enclosure. You have to have that element of getting away from the light as well.
Exactly, self-regulation is vital. One point I will make as well is that we learned very recently by using a very expensive, very specialized spectrometer. We had assumed that the spectrum of a halogen lamp and a tungsten lamp would be exactly the same because they both use tungsten as the heating element. But actually, I can see up to 1640 nanometers now, and we can see that there is a difference in the spectrum between the two different lamps. And I've submitted that to the Reptile lighting guys, so they can make of it what they will. The spectrum that's given out for the heat projector is worked out on theory. There isn't a spectrometer that can read those wavelengths easily. So I'm not convinced that the spectrum that's being shown on some forums is actually accurate, because it's worked out by paper and guesstimate of what it should look like as a black body radiator.
Gotcha.
Not actually read by a sensor. So until we can find a sensor that can read all the way up into the mid-range of infrared as a classification, we don't really know for sure what it does.
Well, and it's interesting that there's such a difference between just a tungsten bulb and a halogen bulb, considering they do use the same filament. But I guess it is the halogen gas in the bulb that changes the temperature or changes the spectrum in some way.
Yeah, it's not a massive difference, but there is a marked difference between the spectrum of the two lamps.
Interesting.
In infrared, not in the visible part.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we're talking about products. Let's discuss how products get developed. You're talking about the Deep Heat Projector, having a 7-year development phase. So how do you guys even tackle creating a new project or a product? Are you finding a hole in the market where you think, okay, this is something that we could use to improve the life of the animal, and then start there and then figure out what that product would be, or how does this process work?
We as a brand, and with me leading this brand, we always start with animal welfare first. Okay, is there a product that's not working effectively, or is there a complete hole in the market, or is there something that somebody's not thought about? And the way to find that out is to both look at animal behavior. In terms of lighting, we look at the spectrum of the sun as the perfect provider, and then start to look as in detailed as we can with the technology that exists around us, and then see if there's anything that matches or how you can better something. And generally, that's when you start uncovering the many issues that surround the reason why that product doesn't exist in the first place.
Right.
and technology always has limitations, and for many reasons, physics being one of the main. You can't expect X product to do Y if it's been designed to do X.
Right.
It's never ever going to do Y, and trying to force a product to do what you want it to do in a way that it's not been designed to do is a fool's game, really. So we always start with, what do animals need? What can we do to make things better? And how can we do that at an affordable price?
Right.
Which is important for us all as keepers. We need to be able to afford to keep our animals. And then it's time, huge amounts of time. The heat projector was 7 years start to finish, and I'll be working on 50 or 60 other projects at the same time, and in and out, and in and out. There's actually a lamp I've been working on at the moment, which has been just nearly a 5-year project, which I'll give you a bit of an exclusive rundown of how and why we've developed it, just so that you guys can understand how complex creating a new lamp or adjusting a lamp can be before it enters the market. And sadly, this is why we see substandard product on the market. If a brand or an importer doesn't understand reptilian biology and the characteristics of light, you can very easily source and buy lamps in China or other places in the world, put them in a reptile box and sell them, and find that they're completely unsuitable. Case in point, those horrible little halogen lamps with the protective lens removed from the front. I get the factory that makes them email me every single week trying to tell me that they've got an affordable UVB lamp. They haven't. They've got a dangerous lamp with some UVB and some UVC, and they're unusable.
Right.
Because they don't understand. They're just looking for that word UVB without realizing that UVB is a whole set of wavelengths that are only really made safe and effective when you plug it into UVA as well, the subject of our previous talk. So there's many dangers. You really do need to understand the why and how before you can do something. And it typically takes us between 2 and 5 years to bring something that we're happy with.
Right.
And this story, we've been really privileged in the since our last talk to see our business in the United States and Canada grow, and interest in our business grow considerably. We have 2 incredible importers in the USA. We've got a really good importer in Canada, and now you might have noticed you can buy some of our product in PetSmart as well.
Yeah, I was happy to see that.
Yeah, so we've been doing our best to try and make availability better. But one of the questions I was asked really early on in that whole process, and that particular deal took a couple of years, was that there still was and is a need for a combi lamp in the USA that doesn't have a whole host of technology issues, a self-ballasted mercury vapor. And we make a self-ballasted mercury vapor lamp called the D3 Baskin lamp in 240 volt for the UK and the EU area. And actually, mercury vapor lamps are, even though there's frustrations because you can't thermostatically control them, but they are actually, if you use them correctly, they're a pretty good light source. They are infrared A rich. They pump hot. They're quite bright. They've got a high color rendition. And in theory, they should have a very stable UVA to UVB ratio. And certainly we see quality tolerances in the 240 volt market much, much smaller than has been reported in the USA. And we've all seen that clip where online where the chap would taken 1 brand of mercury vapor out of a box, let it run, and he was getting a UV index of 2 at something like 15 inches. Then he took from exactly the same outer, took another lamp out, and it was over 50.
Yeah.
And there's these massive tolerances between the lamps. And even historically, I understand some US brands, they've had to get shipments of lamps in and then hand sort them into low, medium and high outputs, because they are handmade. They are very fickle. They're complex to make. You're vaporizing mercury to create UV in a specific way. And so we were asked whether we could work on a 110 volt, 110, 120 volt version of the mercury vapor lamp. And so I put the project off for a bit, just while I thought about it, because we needed to know why are these massive quality and output tolerances worse in the USA and Canada than they are in the UK and Europe.
Right.
And so we buddied up with our friends in Germany. You know, these guys have access to some of the most complex machinery in the world, and took mercury vapor lamps back to the very core physics. Now, keep in mind, mercury vapor was designed in the mid-1930s as a human tanning lamp. 300 watt lamp. Can you imagine what it'd be like to sit under that?
No.
And
wow.
What we've done is try and convert what was a sun tanning lamp into something that's usable for reptiles, and then try and improve on that over time. Over 10 years ago, I added for the 240 volt version, I added a phosphor coating to the lens so that you'd get a better coloration, a better spread of light, no sort of dead spots anywhere. And I was quite proud of that at the time. We soon discovered, you know, testing hundreds. One of the test rooms had 200 mercury vapor lamps being tested by the German team to see where these quality issues were coming from.
Wow. And
the resulting conversation that came off of that was that we decided or found out that actually all of the lamps that we could find that were running on 110 to 120 volt had been converted from 240 volt. Okay, so we've taken a 240 volt model and tried to convert it to 110 volt, which you can do with a filament lamp. You can't do that with mercury vapor because the ignition system is then completely in the wrong place. You need a different set of igniters and heaters. You need the arc tube, so the tube that contains the mercury and gases in a completely different at a completely different angle. You need to redesign a lamp from the ground up. And so that's what we eventually did with our German partners, was take mercury vapor lamp design back to the 1930s, where it all started, and then create a mercury vapor lamp that is designed to run on 110 to 120 volt, but hadn't been converted from 240 in the first place.
Right.
And, you know, took over 5 years to get to the point that we're at now, or very close to 5 years. And the level of testing, you know, we think we've cracked it. Make a load of lamps, test them, bin them. Make a load of lamps, test them, bin them. Find out what you've done right and find out what's going wrong. And we really did. We had to sit down as physicists, looking at the way the ignition system heats the lamp and what happens then to that mercury vapor and how light is produced from the lamp. It was a complete redesign. There was no Me Too provision. There was no, well, let's try this and we'll see what happens. It was root and branch, scientific drawing, start to finish. And we've eventually cracked it. We found the perfect angle for the arc tube. We found the perfect configuration for the ignition system of the lamp. Some people will call it a heating system. In the UK, we tend to call it we call them igniters. So I call it an ignition system, even though you're not actually igniting anything. You're superheating mercury until it vaporizes. And what we found over a long period of time, so then we go into testing again, live testing in labs, that the production values were suddenly back down to the ideal 11% tolerances that we have in the 240 market in terms of output. You're never ever going to get two mercury vapor lamps the same. They are handmade. Everyone will be slightly different, and depending what your running voltage is and what hertz is coming through your plug, it will affect the lamp slightly. In my building here, we run the UK is supposed to be 240 volt. We run at about 244, 246 all the time. So things that are plugged in here are slightly over-provided.
Right.
All of these things will affect the output of a lamp. A lamp that's not connected properly in the lamp holder, or if you've got a dodgy timer or anything like that will affect the eventual output of the lamp. But what we found in lab conditions, that we were, instead of having this massive output tolerance of either 2 or 50, that we were down now to the UV index parameters that we show on our boxes, and around about, on average, about 11% output swing, which is quite incredible for a mercury vapor lamp. We found that they were much more robust. They don't fail anywhere near as quickly as some poor keepers were suggesting on the reptile lighting forums. That they're buying mercury vapor lamps and they just were pinging after a couple of days. Mm-hmm. So we've had to go root and branch back and redesign a brand new lamp for the particularly for the USA and Canada. That we will be very open in saying that we've created this for that market. We haven't adapted existing tech. We haven't tried to alter existing tech. We've used the necessary function of a mercury vapor lamp and altered it completely towards the running voltage that is common for the Americas.
So this is basically the only mercury vapor bulb that's actually produced for 110, 120 that's not been retrofitted in some way, or
as far as we know.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
I stand corrected. All of the ones that we looked at from the major brands, and you can tell because the configuration of the ignition system is in the same position as the 240 volt.
Right.
So that if you're using the ignition system and then changing the voltage of the wiring, it's just been converted from 240 to 110. It's not been designed for 110. So as far as we know, this is exclusive new technology. It's certainly exclusive to our brand.
Well, and it's something that you don't really think about as a consumer is the amount of time and money that goes into developing a product. You just grab it off the shelf and pay your money for it and plug it in. But I can't imagine how much expense there is in actually creating a project. And hopefully you almost are forced to find an answer because of how much time and money you've spent. I'm sure when you were binning some of those new designs, you're thinking, okay, the next one better work because we need a product to sell at some point at the end of this path.
There is a little bit of that. I'm really lucky that I have a very, very supportive parent company and a managing director that's as passionate to get things right as I am. So we understand as a business that there are R&D costs. There's another project I'm working on at the moment, still working on, and we've already spent over $400,000 on R&D.
Wow.
And that's not including buying any stock. That's just in time, certification, legal testing, prototypes, registrations, web creation. That it really does mount up. So there is a cost, and there's a huge cost in time, which obviously has a financial cost.
Right.
But yeah, these things don't happen overnight. They shouldn't. There should be no reptile brand out there that says, let's make a UV lamp, make a phone call, we've got one, we'll market that.
Yeah.
That should never happen. It should always take years. If not, you don't understand your product.
Well, and then what about the testing after you have a product that passes maybe like the physics testing, you're getting the right reads and you've brought it into the variants the error variants that you're happy with. And then what about testing it on the animals? Is that something that you have to do as well? I mean, but I'm sure before the product heads to the market, there's got to be some testing that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a very defined product release process. If it's a UV lamp, we start off with a formal brief. Now, my briefs are generally up to 20,000 words. That's just explaining what I need a product to do and how we've designed it. We go into initial drawing, sourcing, sorting it all out. We document all that. Once we have a lamp that we think is okay, it will then go to one of the world's most expensive integrated spheres. We're very lucky to have access to yes, I've got a spectrometer here, but we also have access to a sphere, and a sphere will give you very accurate readings across the spectrum of the lamp. So then we'll have at hundreds of points as well. And then we'll be able to assess whether that lamp is performing in the way that handheld meters and handheld spectrometers suggest. If that all matches up, that will either then be tested independently. And, people know we've worked with Frances for decades now. She's never been employed by us, but we have used her services to double check our math as an expression. And then if that comes back as being, yes, there's nothing dangerous here and it's good for this, or you need to tweak that, if at any point when we've worked with her over the years and she's come back and said, that's not right, I would bin it and start again. So we're then fairly confident that the lamp is working the way that it should do, that there's no safety issues. We would then place the lamp with a series of people, trusted, independent testers, and in our own collection. We know it's safe. We know there's no detriment to the animals. It will all be measured out. And then it's just longevity testing and observation.
Wow. That is quite I guess you have to do it.
You can see why it takes 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm sure even that last phase probably takes a whole year. You got to go through longevity testing. And so the product that the mercury-vapor that's going to be available for North America, when does that's not out yet, right?
No, that will arrive in the US and Canada probably early September.
Okay.
2022. And it will be the brand name is D3 Evo.
Okay.
Obviously an evolution of our trademark already, which is the D3 basking lamp. So it'll be called the D3 Evo. And we're writing on the packaging exclusive new technology. We're making it very easy for keepers to understand the technology. There's full UV index outputs printed on the back. I'm very excited about it. There still is a very good use for mercury vapor if you use them correctly. That's usually alongside T5s.
Yeah. Well, and I know one of the big complaints about mercury vapor was sometimes they have horrible color, right? It's like almost like a greeny color. So there's some cheaper bulbs, or I don't know if they're cheaper, or they're very yellow and they just don't look natural. And I assume that how does the light look coming off of that product?
They have a very high color rendering index, so things look quite natural underneath them if they're made properly. But they still have this sunlight glow, this sort of orangey yellow color. And that's just the nature of the lamp. Halogens are golden.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's kind of what makes them look so bright. If you get those green spots, it's because the arc tube's in the wrong place.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, I'm sure people will be excited about that product. Yeah,
we really have put a lot of work into it. So I'm quite excited to see how it's accepted. Obviously, our prime market is the UK and Europe and Australia. Of course, we can't sell it. There at all.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how our American friends.
It's all up to us.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the other side to Arcadia is diets and food and nutrition. Obviously everybody knows Arcadia for lighting and heating, and that is a big primary part of your business. But then you also have diets and foods and gut load and whatnot. And so that also has a whole other area of R&D that's associated with it. That's probably very different from the lighting, but I'm sure just as extensive.
Yeah, it really does. Sometimes even more so. And one of the questions I'm asked all the time is, Arcadia is a lighting brand and it always has been. Why are you dabbling around in reptile nutrition? Well, the first answer is and again, if you read that book, I view the provision of photons, terrestrial photons to animals, as being part of the nutrient cycle.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the provision of light is nutrition. So therefore we really must provide them the best kind of ingestible nutrition as well. And I, right back all those years ago when I first started working on what became Earth Pro, it was simply because I couldn't find a single product on the market that I was happy to use in terms of mineral powders. They so over-egged with D3 and vitamin A, and it was all sort of mix and match. Nothing was natural. And so we released Earth Pro under the Wild Recreation banner as all natural. So, there's no synthetics, no colors, no flavors, no additives. We're not taking a spoon of sodium and a spoon of phosphorus and a spoon of calcium and a spoon of magnesium and mixing it all up until the levels that they suggest are safe for agriculture. No, we use a clay. So we use a clay as our base. It's mined product and it's full spectrum mineral. And because it's come out the ground, it's naturally balanced anyway. Mm-hmm. Upshoots your bioavailability. And I think that's why the majority of keepers have seen such good responses with the powders and foods that we've made. We've actually been making, this will be an exclusive, I probably shouldn't be talking about it, but we've been asked for years now whether we should make a tortoise food. And we make an aquatic turtle food, all natural, no additives. It just is made from fish, insects, plants. We pelletize that. It's fantastic. But for tortoises, we didn't have for testudo species really. There just wasn't anything available, again, that I would use. And moreover, there was nothing available to me that I could create to make something that I would use. So we started talking about creating a tortoise food in 2017.
Wow.
And so I've kept the notes, I've kept the project ticking along until the ingredients that we would need to make something became available. And late last year, that actually happened. So that led on to me rewriting the brief, another big, long, boring document all my staff have to read. And we dissected the ingredients list of all of the major manufacturers of tortoise food. Put it all onto a spreadsheet. I wanted to see what they were made of, what the nutrient values were, what the additive values were, and where we could try and do something that was more natural for a Mediterranean species. And what we found out instantly, I can't even say very quickly, it was instantly, when you start looking at the ingredients of commercial tortoise food, and I think we all should, you'll very, very quickly see that they are made from waste, almond nutshells, sunflower seed husks, the core of sweet corn, maize, soya bean husk. And then that's mixed with bran or wheat or the outer sheath, the unedible bit of rice. And so you get that as your main ingredients when you look at the ingredients list. And then they add in amino acid powder. So there's your protein. They'll add in sunflower oil. There's your oils and fats. Then it will clearly state artificial and natural colours, flavours and preservatives. And then add in a vitamin powder. Some brands might add in some Timothy hay or a few herb extracts usually. And because these diets are pelletized, what you have to do is mill that concoction. So what we found was we've got products that are made, we know that tortoises need fibre. okay? And you can get really good fibre from a nutshell. It's all fibre. In actual fact, you might as well use coir. It's all the same.
Right.
But because you then need to pelletize it, you have to mill it, you have to grind it. So you're grinding all of these insoluble fibres and additives into a flour. That flour's then heated, steamed, coloured, scented, and pushed through an extruder to make a pellet. And when you look at the nutrient values of some of these pellets, you might have 23-25% fibre, 10%, 9% protein, and that would tick all the boxes in terms of what's best for a Mediterranean tortoise. But actually, what we're not doing is providing any food. What we're doing is providing insoluble fibre of a microscopic particulate. Don't forget, and particle size is important. We'll come back to that. So we've milled this fibre into a flour, and then we've added in a protein complex to give the protein, because there's no protein in fibres. We've added in some plant attractants by adding in some essences, if you're lucky, a vitamin and mineral complex, and then we've stained it a colour and added in an artificial smell. That's not a food. It may have the nutrient levels that you're looking for, but there's no food in it. It's waste.
Right.
It's nutshells, the seed shells and maize husks and all these things to create fibre. Well, actually, that blew my mind. And at that point, we sought veterinary assistance. And we're very lucky to have a veterinary oversight anyway. And again, the reaction was the same. How can this be true? Why are the foods that are available made from waste? And how can we improve on that?
Well, and I guess in the wild, the tortoise, they're going to be eating lots of cellulose heavy, fiber heavy, grasses and scrubs and stuff and whatnot, but also they're going to be eating greenery as well. And when they eat the plant, they're probably eating part of the root and the flesh of the plant, not just the husk.
You're exactly right. These Mediterranean, particularly testudo species, are browsers. They're eating live and dried grasses, thickets, overhanging leaves, herbs and root vegetables, flowers, buds, anything that's at their kind of level. There's a big geophagy thing there. They're tearing some plants up, roots and all. There's a lot of soil that goes in the mouth. But their insoluble fibre is coming from plants. Mm-hmm. And I'll send you a link to a paper so you can share it with everybody. But actually it's not a paper, it's a PhD, where they were looking at fibre strand length in tortoises and how that played a role in gut culture in the beneficial, because tortoises are high in gut fermenters. So that it's not straight digestion, we have a fermentation chamber as well. And what they found is where they were using finely milled fibre particles, the culture numbers and species, diversification of species was much lower inside the hindgut than were in long strand insoluble fibres. And, they ferment tortoises in the hindgut. They've already stripped off of the plant in the stomach all of the easy accessible nutrition. This is a second go at it. They're trying to take everything out of what they've eaten, sugars mostly by this point, before they pass the waste matter. But it's here where your microbiome is living. And the healthier your microbiome is and the more diversification of species you have in your microbiome, the healthier you are, because that's the powerhouse of the body. We all know this. Mm-hmm. And so fibre length really matters, and type of fibre really matters. Or you're quite right, we could just fill food up with cellulose strands at microscopic lengths and it'd be fine, but it's not. So we went back to the drawing board to try and find a diet that would fall within the Earth Pro remit. And to do that, we made an absolute point of no waste material, no food byproducts, no what they call middlings, so again, unusable parts from plants, and no flowers, no additives, no colours, no scents. We had to do that, or I simply wouldn't have it in the range. And what we found was a European-grown mix of grasses and herbs. So there's meadows grown for commercial farming that we had access to. And there is a minimum of 52 different species of grass and herb in this mix, and on average about 60 actually, but we're going to err to the side of caution and tell people 56 grasses and herbs. So this is an EU-grown grass and herb mix, all that occur in the EU, freshly mown throughout the seasons because it's constantly replanted and dried in the normal way and delivered to us as whole product. And I thought that was really exciting. You know, if you've got access, let's say you've chosen not to feed what is waste matter, tortoise food, and you're feeding your animals forage and weeds from home. You've probably still only got access to a dozen different weeds at any one time. Well, right. Suddenly we've got 52, and it's seasonal as well, so it will change through the batches because it's a seasonal mix. And that wasn't enough for me, so we ended up adding another 9 or 10 different plants. So roses, nettles, plantain, dandelions, marigolds, all of these different plants we added into the mix. Bee pollen, revitalized. So we worked with a vet to work out a ratio of our vitamin powder that could go into this mix, just so there's a base level of A, D, and E. And we concocted this recipe that really does look on paper like the wild diet. It's fresh, and it is fresh plants, because what we do with it, we cold press it. So we're not going to steam it. We're not going to extrude it into a pellet. We cold press. So all the plant material gets mixed up and we cold press it into a block, and then the block's cut into tiles. So you end up with a little square of compressed grass, what looks like compressed grass. And basically you simply add water to it. So 12 teaspoons of water for each tile, and the whole thing will swell and regreen. Wow. So it's quite amazing. Most of it goes back to being green again, and you get this lovely meadow fresh smell. And you know, in that mix, there is at least 52 grasses and herbs, plus 8 or 9 other plants like blackberry leaves and raspberry leaves and roses and all these other things, a background level of fat-soluble vitamins, B vitamins, calcium, an amino acid complex, and to produce something that is as close to nature as possible and really easy to feed. You take a tile, put it in its dish, you rehydrate it, wait for it to rehydrate, feed it. And so we worked really, really hard on that, really, really hard, and worked with the vets so much that we're really proud to say that we're being allowed to print on the packaging developed with vets. The That's vets and allowing us to use a name and registration number so people can check. You know, our work's been checked, double checked and approved. And not in the way that it's a veterinary medicine, but it is an all-natural type food that we've developed alongside a zoo vet, that we believe there's nothing else like it on the market at all.
So when you process the grass, are you chopping it at all, or is it like, how long are the strands within the compressed tile?
No, so it's whole grass by the time it arrives to us. Mm-hmm. That obviously goes into a hopper where it's mixed with the other ingredients to industry formulations. You know, there's ways that they can mix things, so you can put a teaspoon of something in and it will still mix over everything. They're quite clever. But then as it comes through the press, you know, the material comes through big on a belt, and then that's pressed down in a jig and then cut. So the machine will compact it, cut it, And that's where you end. So the tiles are, I think, 1.25 inches by 1.5 inches by 1/4 deep. You know, they are well compressed by the time they're packaged. But that means your fiber strand length is 1.25 inches.
Right.
Not
so a lot bigger than powder.
Yeah. And we add nothing to it. No scents, no colors, no preservatives, no additives of any sort other than we've added some of our revitalized powder to it for background vitamins A, D3 and E. Other than that, it's as it would be found outside. So really proud of that, and that will be called Optimized 52. Obviously, 52 goes back to the number of grasses that are in the mix.
And when's that launch supposed to be due for?
That's September as well.
Oh, that's September too. Okay, that's awesome. I almost want to buy a Tortoise just to buy it.
It's you know, when you look at something when it's all hydrated up and you think, I wouldn't mind eating that.
Yeah, it's a nice salad.
You just want to try it. But each tile weighs, as dry, about 12 grams. But by the time you've rehydrated it, it provides about, on average, 34 grams of whole food.
Amazing. And then I guess there's a testing process there too, with, you know, feeding it to tortoises.
We were very lucky to have access to a big group of tortoises from numerous testudo species, and actually we kept very accurate feeding records, and we saw which tortoises went to it on the first feed or the second or the third, and you know, that's a really interesting point, Dylan, because as you do with cats and dogs, there should always be, particularly for tortoises, there should be a transition period from one food to another.
Mm-hmm.
So as part of the web page, when the food goes live, there will be a downloadable guide and a video which will show you how to properly transition your tortoise from one food to another towards Optimized 52 in a staged way. And we found that 100% of the test base that we used over a period of time would be accepting the food by feed 6.
Okay, that's pretty good, yeah.
So it wasn't a massive amount of time, but they would go onto it. There's one final point I'll make on that. Very clearly on the packaging, we print clearly in bold, can make up to 70% of the total diet. Now you'll notice on products like InsectiGold and OmniGold, we are passionate about variation. Okay, we think that Optimized 52 is the most natural whole food diet that you'll find for your tortoise. However, you can make that better by still growing your herbs at home and sourcing good salads, staying away from fruits, and adding in more variety. And we will show you how to do that with a recipe section as well. We'll give you creative ideas of how you can improve more fully. So if anybody ever comes to me and says, are your foods complete foods? That's all I need to feed my animal. I always say no. Mm-hmm. Whether in practice it's true or not. You know, there's benefits of feeding live insects, there's benefits of adding to some species, and there's benefits of adding plant matter of other safe species as well.
Do you ever think about that problem when it comes to snakes? Because with snakes, quite often we are feeding a mono diet. I mean, there's a few of us that are, you know, changing prey items and whatnot, but that's a hard space to add a supplement in. I'm not sure if Arcadia's ever thought about tackling that market at all, just because the nature of the you know, feeding whole prey is definitely different than feeding a gecko or a tortoise. But that is a bad habit that people get stuck into, is consistently feeding the same thing over and over and over again. Do you ever think about that?
I think about it, and I do not have a solution.
Okay, yeah, that's a tricky one.
I've really, really thought about it. And at the moment, other than cycling rats through gerbils, through mice, through quail and chicks, and using as much variety as you can, I think, you know, even in my second book, all those years ago, I laid out a case for the nest raiding and making little nests of pinks instead of one big feeder source, and just so we've got nutritional variation. With snakes, it's difficult.
Yeah. But I mean, you have to imagine that most snakes that we keep in captivity are not like a specialized eater in the wild. It's not like they eat a single, there are examples of species that eat a single prey source, or, 80% of a single prey source, like slug eaters or something. But for the most part, these animals are eating a variation. So yeah, I think that's the only way to do it right now, is just making sure that you're cycling through different items.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not sure we will ever find a solution to that.
Yeah. I have a question about the vitamin D. You talked about using the revitalized D3 mixing into that tile, and I know that that's a relatively new product, I think, and so I thought maybe we could just finish off talking about oral supplementation of vitamin D, because I think you previously did not have a oral D3 supplement, and it was relying on the UV, and then something had changed in the last couple of years where now it's sort of, you're recommending it a little bit more once in a while. So maybe you could just clear some of the confusion up and talk about that.
Yes, none of the historic products, Earth Pro A, calcium, magnesium, none of the foods had D3 added at all. And I was really passionate about allowing your UV lamps to do that, and they will if you use them properly. But there was two points of difference for me that changed my mind. Firstly, the sheer weight of keepers that were coming to me saying, I've been buying this product, I've been buying that product, and I use yours for 4 feeds, and then I use X product for another. And I just knew that we were never going to change that. And again, when I put my spreadsheet together to look at the additive values of all the different brands I could find, and I found some that had 2 and 3 million units of D3 in the mix. We have to remember that vitamin D3 in that format was the most plentiful rodenticide in the world. It was rat poison in a massive dose. It kills things. And so that led me on a pathway of discovery of what kind of levels of D3 and E that an animal would actually experience orally in the diet. I was then presented with a paper that showed me, proved actually, I'd been involved in the supply of the equipment for the study, that most of the insects in a trial that were provided with UV were making D3 in their bodies.
Right.
And so then I started looking at more and more papers, and actually, if you read my printed works, you'll see that I laid out a case with a leopard gecko is not primarily an insectivore. They will eat each other, and they will eat nest-fallen birds and eggs, and they are opportunistic omnivores that are highly insectivorous. Mm-hmm. Now, if they do eat the odd egg, or they do eat the odd baby lizard or frog somewhere in the year, they are self-supplementing with A, D3 and E. And that applies to any species. Unless you've got a prime herbivore, because plants generally only produce D2, then they're not really going to encounter much in the way of D3 in the wild diet unless they happen along carrion and decide opportunistically that they're going to eat that. Mm-hmm. Now, it upsets some tortoise keepers, but there's plenty of records of testudo munching down on a run-over rabbit.
Oh, yeah.
They really will, even though they are massively herbivorous. Every now and again, opportunity will present them with something, and they'll take that opportunity. So I kind of, in one hand, I had this need. People were buying product that I believed was much too strong. And on the other hand, I was starting to be presented a case which proved that many of the species that we keep that are insectivores or herbivores, or we've accepted as being insectivores or herbivores, actually probably weren't in totality, that they remain opportunistic. And anyway, even if they were insectivores, if they're eating insects that are outside and have been under the sun all day, or even at night and they've been out in the sun all day, have D3 in the body. And so I saw no reason at all why providing low levels of vitamin A, D3 and E into the diet in a measured way wasn't wild-like, because it would replicate wild feeding. So I formulated, and this took years, Dylan. I mean, years of frustration and I worked with 3 different vets on this one. four different vets on this one, ping-ponging backwards and forwards. What should we do? What was safe? What wasn't? What was right for the brand? What wasn't? What was right for the animals? All of these different things until we come up with a recipe that I was happy with, and that gave you all of the benefits of Earth Pro A. We added 8% magnesium into Revitalized. I'm really passionate on magnesium. And we put A, D3 and E in at quite low levels. And we print on there suitable for use with modern D3, with modern UVB systems. You know, if you haven't got UVB, then don't buy Revitalized. It's not right for you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But if you're using variety feeding, you've got good heating and lighting, and you'll follow the program that we've got on our website, which is Earth Pro A on feed 1, 2, and 3, Earth Pro Calcium Magnesium on feed 4. Then we go back to Earth Pro A on 5, 6, and 7, then Revitalized on feed 8, and we carry that on in a ever-looping cycle. You'll never overdose, but you will be replicating those likely opportunistic feedings that you might get in the wild.
Well, yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, and the magic of those fat-soluble vitamins is they get stored. So I guess that is also the danger of getting into an overdose situation because they are stored in the body. But in a wild setting, you know, they take the opportunity to eat a mouse that they found dead on the floor, and that could give them enough vitamin D for a good stretch of time. Not to mention what they're getting from the sun. But so just to be clear, the Revitalized D3 is not a daily supplement. It's something that you want to use once a week or so, or once every 8 days, or however 8 feeds.
Every 8th. If you follow the program, it's every 8th feed,
right.
Not every 8th day. We should have rest days for adult animals,
mm-hmm.
So it's every 8th feed. If you are not sure about your UV lighting, or you don't use UV lighting, but you still want to use natural type powders, then you can actually use Revitalized at every other feed quite safely. The levels are much lower than you'd find in most powders, and they need to be, because as you quite rightly say, they're fat soluble.
Yeah, so eventually that storage is going to continue to build and build and build. And yeah, I know that hypervitaminosis D3 is actually kind of a sneaky it's sort of an insidious issue that it can easily happen if you're constantly dumping oral D3 into the mix, which is nice about the UV lighting, is because the body takes care of all that. But like you said, replicating some of that oral ingestion is probably beneficial.
And an over-provision of vitamin A is not only quite dangerous, but it interferes with the D3 cycle as well. So right. If you have massive quantities of vitamin A preformed, then it mucks around with the function of the D3 cycle.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered quite a lot today. We've given a lot of people a lot to think about, as well as probably some exciting products for the fall that they can be looking into. Is there anything that we didn't say today that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I just wish everybody a fantastic 22 into 23. Hopefully I'll be welcome to come back next year, and
absolutely
hopefully there's something more exciting to show you in the meantime. Please everybody, carry on doing what you're doing. Get into naturalism, understand it, tell your friends, take good pictures, share them with us. We've got a fantastic hobby. We just really need to enjoy it and protect it from unnecessary attack.
Exactly. Very well said. And as always, John, I love chatting with you. I know the listeners will enjoy this as well. So it's a pleasure every year. We'll definitely do it again next summer. And thank you so much for being with me today.
An absolute pleasure.
All right, that is the end of that episode. John, as always, it's an absolute pleasure to chat with you. You make everything so exciting, and the passion that you have for the projects that you're working on makes it just mind-blowing to listen to. So thank you so much. Again, obviously, we'll do a 5th one next summer, which I'm already looking forward to. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the podcast and you want to help support it, the easiest thing you can do is just share it. Share it on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, however you want to share it. Please do that. It really does help bring new ears and eyes to the show. Thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. As I said in the intro, we are going to be decking out this entire podcast studio with Custom Reptile Habitats enclosures, which we will be doing some point in the fall. Of course, there'll be videos on YouTube, so make sure you're following me there if you want to see that. Make sure you go to animalsathome.network.com for more information on this podcast or any other podcast on the network. Like I said, I am taking a short podcasting break through the fall here. There may be some actual YouTube videos peppered in during that break, but the podcast will be taking a short break for about a month. But there are other podcasts on this network that will still be going guns blazing, and you'll be able to absorb reptile-related podcast content on the Animals at Home network. So I don't think you'll be starving for content. And also, if you are interested in... Actually, I think that's it. I don't know where I was going to go with that. Sometimes my brain just runs on autopilot. So anyway, I think that is the end of this episode. Again, we're taking a short break. I will see you afterwards. Enjoy the rest of your summer and what's left of summer and then into the fall. And I will catch you guys in the next episode.